But perhaps the longer legacy of this, which took me a while to realize, is all this was done with 2/3 of the town watching every step of the way. And they saw the original posting, they saw the follow-up, and you know, I just heard from person after person saying, well, if Lauren and Julia can start a food shelf, you know, wow, what could I do? And you know, we need a new ice rink, you know, on the town green for the kids, or whatever. And there have been a number of really powerful projects that have gotten going.
The ultimate motivation, I guess, knowing you can make a difference. What about Denise and Andre? Do you have tips for what motivates people to participate with you?
I think it's recognizing their efforts, honestly. I mean, there are so many different ways to look at it, but I think ultimately some of it comes from the social aspect of it. People regard us not just as the stewards of the Rapidian, but as community members as well. So when we recognize them, that means a lot to them, whether it's via social media or even just a personal email saying, hey, I really enjoyed this article, or sending them, you know, recommendations to other things that they might be interested in. That really becomes a big part of it. Another thing that I think really engages people a lot, which is a piece of feedback that we got from a participant who actually is very well established in the publishing field, was that it should be social. You know, for the people who aren't necessarily getting a lot out of the volunteer process in terms of acquiring extra media skills, there's a social aspect to reporting. It's, you know, going to this event with another reporter and really getting to gab about it, like after the fact, or being part of a beat, or something like that, that really makes them feel accountable to one another to create content, but also just adds that social aspect, because a lot of times with the highest level of engagement for us, which is contributing a piece of content, you're competing against so many different priorities in people's lives. So when you have that social vehicle to add to the fray, like, it really does help in terms of people coming through with their commitments. And it also, not only that for us, but it makes it a much richer experience for them if it's a collaboration of some sort, or if they're going with another reporter and really discussing it, or just becoming a part of a cohort.
That social media is a really funny phrase, isn't it? I mean, isn't the act of cutting out something from a newspaper and mailing it social? I get that it's like practical to have it refer to digital sharing tools right at the moment, but the idea of media being social, in and of itself, includes the recognition of how it's going to be used, right? That I think you will enjoy this, and so I'm giving it to you. I think you will act on this. In a way, the boxes newspaper include that say, here's when the meeting is, or here's how to contact your legislator. That's social. This is tactile. We have something to do with this here that we hope you will do. So I'm curious yeah, Jay, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I wanted to follow up on something that Denise said earlier. I really like this notion of the ladder of engagement, and I think it's really important to try and provide many openings for people short of the most difficult kind of engagement, which is writing articles and writing posts. If your expectation is that your contributors are going to write posts for you, that's actually about 1% of the possible community contributors. And we have to figure out much more lower cost ways. And I think this idea of the ladder of engagement is really central to that. And I urge Joy to pick that up in her research and develop that. So in thinking about that idea, I think one of the ways that owners of these sites go wrong is they start with, when they think about community contributors, there's a tendency to start with, what do we need done, right? And then you think, well, how can I get people in the community to do what needs to be done? Now, there is a class of contributors who, when you ask them, what do you want to do? They will say, well, what needs to be done? I have never heard a man say that, but there are some women who who will say that, but that's also a very tiny percentage of people who think that way. So you can get some people that way, but you're really going to be minimizing your returns if you start with what needs to be done. So a different way of thinking about it is to start with what the contributors have to give, right? And in that respect, I would like to see more sites develop guides for contributors that start not with what needs to be done or what you can do as a contributor, but instead start with what you have. So, do you have 2 minutes? You can leave a comment at our site. Here's how to do it. Do you have 20 minutes? Here is what you can do to help us. You can give us a source for this story. Do you visit your neighborhood coffee shops and tip people? You can leave a Rapidian pin, right? You can help us that way. Do you have an hour? You can do this. Do you have $10? Here's what you can do. So if you start your contributors guide, not with what needs to be done, but what contributors may have, right? And then tell them what they can do with either the time, the resources, the knowledge, the connections, or the money that they have, then we're much closer to this notion of a laddering of engagement, right? So just flip it a little. Instead of what needs to be done, start with what do potential contributors have.
And just to add to that, I kind of wanted to share an anecdote. Laura, you'll have to jump in if I get facts mixed a little. But so sometimes, people have something to give, but they don't realize that they had that in their toolbox. So one of the things that we did this last summer was we had a presence at the local LGBTQ festival of the year. And one of the big issues that has come up in the West Michigan area recently has been the City Council of Holland decided not to adopt protection and language for same-sex couples, domestic partnerships, that would really incorporate them into sort of like protective measures as well as extending rights to them and benefits. So it was a major issue that kind of swept Grand Rapids. I mean, all over the area, but especially Grand Rapids. There was a campaign that started locally that all of these people are using, are they called twibbins or something? Like, it's like where you have an image of your campaign overlaid, or laid over your image, your Facebook avatar or your Twitter avatar called Until Love is Equal. So this was a really big issue that was, you could kind of feel it when we went to this festival. So one thing we decided to do in order to engage people in the process of creating content and really giving them a sense of how you can create bite-sized content was we asked them to participate in a video that we then put up. And it was, we asked them a question of like, how do you feel like the community has changed around LGBTQ issues in the last 20 years or so, as well as a couple of other questions around that. We asked, I think, about 10 people, and one woman, it was so interesting. She was really nervous about it. And at first she was really shy and she was sort of like moving around and like, no, I don't really have anything to contribute. But she did. She felt really passionate about it. So she did her snippet with me in the background being like, yeah, you can do it. Yeah, you're totally right. You got it. And then later on, it was really funny. Later on in the day, she came back and it was like, where's your video person? And I was like, oh, he went inside to get more interviews. So she went in there and she came back to me and she said, I nailed it, like this, like she did this, She was like, I totally nailed it. I want to let you know what I just did in the last couple of hours since I last saw you. I went home because of your encouragement. I really wanted to get this right. I wanted to be able to articulate what I was feeling. She was saying, I tend to be better in written communication than verbal communication. I went home and I practiced in front of the mirror for about half an hour to come back and give you this 30-second snippet. And that was something that she didn't know she had to offer. And we, were really happy to take that. That was an amazing experience to be able to have and see somebody feel like they really grew through this one-day process.
And how did that represent success for you?
I think that's more of a qualitative success. It's a very
valid.
good feeling of like this instant like return of this person is now engaged. They're going to remember the Rapidian positively. She actually started recruiting for us at the thing itself and said, you have to get in front of the camera and talk about this.
That's not qualitative, that's quantitative.
Okay, and that. I'm glad you're here to point that out.
I love this idea of the bite-sized content. One thing that we did last year during a music festival, we have a documentary film festival every year in Columbia, Missouri, and a couple of years ago we tried to get people to write movie reviews for us, like, tell us what you think when you get home tonight, email us a few hundred words. I mean, please. Really, people then feel like they have to be able to be good writers. They have to remember at the end of the day and not have lost the piece of paper. Anyway, so what we did last year was show up with a whiteboard and ask people to give us one-word movie reviews. And they wrote it on the board, and then we took their picture with the board. Cute, right? Now, what we didn't do is make that a Facebook gallery and tag them in it so that it would show up on all of their walls. That would have been much smarter. Yes, ma'am.
I have a three-part question. How do you monitor quality of citizen contributions? Do you edit? Do you fact check? What if you don't like the way it's written? That's my second question. And what if there's a problem with it that later comes up, you wind up getting a call by someone's lawyer or even worse?
Well, I'm going to lob this over to Denise, but let me say first that I think a lot of it depends on your purpose. If your purpose is to serve as a forum for people's stories, then what you think becomes less important. If your purpose is to have contributors helping you do the journalism that you think is important, then your role in the process might be bigger. I will also say that as Mizzou hosts a citizen journalism project, My Missouri, and it was the second one in the country, and so broke a lot of ground in terms of what the rules would be for citizen contributions, and as you would imagine, spent a lot of time on the rules and the terms, and a lot of time expecting there to be abuse of those rules and terms, that we're gonna get a lot of pornography and personal attacks and that sort of stuff. One post in 8 years have we taken down because of abuse. Because of the way it's set up, that's just not what the culture of the site is.
But who's ultimately accountable for a libelous error, or if something's made? Has that ever come up anywhere?
It hasn't for us.
Should I bring it, or she can speak to it too?
The Rapidian is part of an organization that comes from the tradition of public access television 30 years ago. So for all of this time, we've dealt with this, well, you know, who's responsible for the content question? And actually, the contributors, just like they have been on public access television for 30 years, and I've only been in federal court once, and that I've been in it 20 years, they actually do take legal responsibility. Now, that being said, most reporters have opted to stay in a new reporter status, if you look at our ladder of engagement, because they like the mentorship, they like to get the feedback, and so ultimately they are responsible. The other thing that is interesting that happens is that we've had really interesting situations where the Rapidian community itself holds writers somewhat accountable for what they write. In other words, last year we have this thing in Grand Rapids called Art Prize, and it's just nuts, and anyway, I'm not going to go there. It's going on right now, which is insanity in Grand Rapids. So if you go to the Rapidian, you're going to see a lot of art criticism right now. But somebody wrote an article that was somewhat critical, and I think it was an opinion piece, about a piece of art that was done by a venue's a host's wife and whatever. But he didn't talk to her. So another Rapidian reporter actually took up the gauntlet and did the other side of the story to try to create balance, and a conversation ensued. So, you know, we do encourage that. We ask a lot more questions that try to push people in a particular direction. And the second thing that's happening now is we're seeding and supporting host organizations, because we recognize that, you know, we have a very small staff, so we don't necessarily have presence and credibility in every neighborhood and in every sector. So we work with those, the church, the neighborhood association, and we actually empower them to become the mentors for their communities and give them the tools to create bureaus. And so we have probably 2 that are working really well and another 3 or 4 that are seeded in neighborhoods to help us with that host organization kind of thing. So that helps create that ladder and inform that ladder that we started with from day one.